Hello, my name is Julia Meiningsberger. I'm a researcher and lecturer at the University of Hain, and it is my pleasure today to welcome representatives of the European Cocoa Association to speak about sustainable production and climate change from an industry perspective. Irene Paviotti is the ECA Sustainability and Food Safety Manager. Hello, Irene. She covers the EU ESG and food safety regulatory landscape, as well as the Joint Cocoa Research Fund activity. Then we also have Evangelos Koumentakos, who is the Environment, Trade and Logistics and Warehousing Managers at the European Cocoa Association. There he covers the EU climate and environment policies, as well as the decarbonization of the maritime sector, trade agreements with third countries, and custom questions. Welcome and thank you for being here today. So we look forward to your presentation on climate change adaptation in agricultural commodities, the case of cocoa. But before we start, maybe could you introduce quickly the ECA to our lecture, to our readers?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. And thank you, Julia, for the invitation and for the opportunity to be here with you. And hopefully it will be useful also for our colleagues that will watch this. The European Cocoa Association represents 60 companies active in the trade, processing and warehousing of cocoa beans, and also related activities and services. Together, our members represent 90% of Europe's cocoa bean grinding, 85% of European industrial chocolate production, and also 85% of the global production of cocoa intermediate products. As ECA, leveraging our being based in Brussels, as you said, we are based in Brussels, our role is to bridge between EU institutions and our members, also to monitor regulatory and scientific developments, and to represent our members' interests in dialogues with EU institutions, also, of course, developing adequate solutions to regulatory challenges. ECA is regulatory collaborates with a number of also of partner organizations. So we are in coalitions in different formations and with different objectives, like the International Cocoa Organization or the World Cocoa Foundation. We also, it is important also maybe in this context of university and research, to mention that we manage the Joint Cocoa Research Fund, which we launched with Caubisco, the Chocolate Confectioners Association, more than a decade ago. So it's quite a long time. And which that fund supports applied research projects. We see what are the challenges and we engage in targeted applied research that addresses different challenges, pests, diseases, food safety, and on environmental also challenges in cocoa production. And that would be in a nutshell what we stand for and what we do here at the European Cocoa Association.
Thank you very much, Evangelos. Maybe as a next question, could you illustrate how cocoa is affected by climate change?
Yes. First, before starting, I would also like to mention that our colleague Michelle End worked on us in preparing this presentation intervention, and she works as a food safety and quality consultant for the ECA. She has many years of experience in the field, and we're really thankful for her very valuable input in this context. And just as a brief introduction, also, we thought it could be interesting to focus on cocoa as an example of how climate change impacts agricultural commodities, but also how and what adaptation looks like. Of course, cocoa is a rather unique commodity due to its geographical identity, let's say, and also the cultural value it has. But still, climate change is already affected quite importantly cocoa production, and with a series of environmental, social, and economic implications that are quite relevant, considering that countries producing cocoa are mostly low and middle income countries. So indeed, by explaining a little bit what how climate change is impacting cocoa production and what strategies are being used for adaptation, we thought interesting parallels might emerge with other agricultural commodities, and give some food for thought into further research, let's say. So then, coming to the question of how climate change impacts cocoa, we can maybe think of the impacts as direct and indirect in brackets, let's say. So the direct effects that climate change is having on cocoa can be defined as those that are being observed on cocoa trees themselves. Just as a reminder, cocoa grows in very specific conditions. So it's mostly between 20 degrees north and south of the equator. It needs a very specific soil. It doesn't have to be too, so it's better when it's fairly loose. Temperature and climate is especially important because it grows in a range between 18 and 20 degrees and 30 degrees Celsius. Doesn't need too much rain, but still some regular amount of rain over the year. Definitely not too much sun, and also not too much shade. And it grows usually above under 300 meters above sea level. And what we've been observing recently this past decades is that climate change is impacting almost each of these factors. So we start, for example, with temperatures. Temperatures are increasing as a result of climate change. And a recent study found that in West Africa, which is the biggest cocoa producing region worldwide, in the past decade, between 2015 and 2024, the temperatures were higher than the optimal range for around, it was a range between 2 to 4 weeks. And in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, which are the biggest producing countries, the number of days that were above this optimal range was 40. And in 2024 alone, the period of time that was above that where when these temperatures were recorded was 3 to 6 weeks, and 70% of the samples, let's say, was 6 weeks higher and hotter. Of course, cocoa can be found all around the world, not only West Africa. And again, it is a mixture of factors. So one needs to take into account also the health of the tree itself, how old it is, the presence of pests and diseases, and especially water availability. But we can definitely see that temperatures are getting higher, and this puts cocoa trees under stress. And another factor, indeed, water. We know it's becoming, rainfall patterns are becoming very erratic. So you might have long periods of drought followed by intense and sudden rainfall events. And again, another study published this year found that focused specifically on Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire found that in Ghana, for example, between 2011 and 2022, total annual precipitation decreased by 15%. Both Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire had longer periods of drought and water stress. And in both countries, the yield, so how much cocoa trees produced, decreased between 2.5% and 37% in this period, depending, of course, on how severe the drought was. And why is this relevant? Because, of course, with drought, there are less flowers, immature pods are lost easily, beans are smaller, less leaves. But on the other hand, with sudden and excessive rainfall, it becomes hard for the tree to do the actual process of photosynthesis, as well as absorbing nutrients, which are rather important, like oxygen. And in addition, with these erratic patterns, it becomes also difficult to have the right ecosystem where pollinators thrive. And that's a real threat to basically the basis and the roots of cocoa production, because the trees are just not pollinated. It is worth mentioning that research is still ongoing, and research found that, for example, the effect of increased CO2 levels in the atmosphere and higher temperatures combined might have actually a positive impact on yield. So cocoa trees may actually produce more. But again, this is assuming the water is regularly available. And what we're seeing is that that's not necessarily the case, especially if infrastructure is lacking to a certain extent. So these are the direct effects. Then we have the indirect effects, in brackets again, sorry, in quotation marks. And these are mostly factors that pose a threat or a challenge to cocoa trees, but whose strength and severity is being compounded by climate change. So this is pests and diseases, because it has been observed and starts being observed. Research is ongoing again, that climate change is impacting how often and how strong these diseases and pests are, and how impactful they are on the cocoa trees. So for example, we have vascular streak dieback, VSD, is a rather geographically limited so far disease, because it happens mostly in the Asia Pacific region, and it's caused by a fungus. And it's especially, how can I say, mortal, and especially, it's a special threat for young trees. And research in 2023 discovered that in cocoa grown in Indonesia, new symptoms of VSD appeared, and this was linked to in changes in the climate. So either due to higher CO2 levels or higher temperatures. But again, it seemed that the tree was responding differently to a changing climate in a new way. The impact is still unknown of this, so research is still ongoing, but that's the first indication. Another example is cocoa swollen shoot virus, which is found in West Africa, has been around since the 1940s, but in recent years has been increasing, been on the rise again. And it is transmitted by a vector by mealybugs, who especially appreciate a warm and humid climate. And I think in 2022, research was conducted in a lab that looked at the transmission dynamics for CSSV. So mealybugs were put in context of higher temperatures, and it was observed that they were more active. So CSSV transmission was higher. And of course, this was a lab experiment, but if we then go again in the real world context and consider that with erratic weather, trees have less ability to absorb water from the soil, we've seen that CSSV symptoms are actually worse. So there are solutions to this, and we will come to that later. But again, this is a way of like the increased virulence and strength of these pests and diseases has been to some extent linked to climate change, and of course research is ongoing. And another second indirect effect, which is closer actually to consumers, is the impact that how climate change impacts trees and cocoa beans has also implications in terms of food safety. Because cocoa beans are harvested and then needs to be dried in the sun. But of course, if weather is erratic, it's difficult to predict when it's going to rain, and then it rains a lot. If beans are left outside to dry, there's the risk that mycotoxins, such as mold-related mycotoxins, such as ochratoxin A, develop. Sometimes an alternative to doing that is using artificial drying, but this risks that beans are contaminated with smoke, which then gives rise to polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons contamination. And both these substances are possible genotoxic carcinogens. There are strict food safety laws, especially in the EU, to regulate them because indeed they pose a threat to consumer safety and health. So again, if with this type, if with climate change, we will see more and more erratic weather patterns, and we'll see increased occurrence of this type of contaminants, then it becomes a challenge going forward that needs to be managed. And so yeah, this is how we can, in a snapshot, categorize this type of impact on cocoa production.
Thank you very much. That was a very interesting introduction and overview of how climate change affects the cocoa production. But could you then also tell us what are some of the strategies that can be employed to adapt cocoa cultivation to the changing climate?
Yes. So here again, I mean, I like working with clear categories, but it's a general way of seeing things. But in general, we can think of potentially adaptation strategies as two types. So one targets directly the planting material, and the other concerns farming practices. So if we start with planting material, first of all, we need to specify that this can be considered experimental. Research is still ongoing here as well. And it basically means to plant cocoa seedlings that have, how can I say, a genetic makeup of resilience to the worst stressors, environmental stressors. So cocoa seedlings that have traits of resistance to drought, higher temperatures, but also disease, especially if the disease is compounded by climate change. And the Joint Cocoa Research Fund between 2017 and 2020 actually supported research in this type of in this field. It was in the context of a collaborative framework for cocoa evaluation. And the purpose of the project was to investigate the link between cocoa genetic diversity and climate change resilience, and especially breeding approaches for resilience to drought. Yeah, that's it. And this type of research takes a lot of time, but the preliminary results were positive because hybrid families were found that displayed that performed well in one of the main regions under study, and also performed well in two regions with particularly dry conditions. But of course, further research, further breeding research will be needed in order to identify precise, established varieties that have these traits that indeed are traits of resilience to drought and diseases. So this is very much work in progress. And I think there will be some time before resilient planting material like this can be actually put up and used at scale in cocoa producing countries. And also very much, let's repeat, this also very much depends on the local context. So this is one thing. Another type of strategies are farming practices, which we can think of in two ways. So first, there's a number of general farming practices, general actions that can be done and can help manage the very threatening impacts of climate change. So if we have erratic weather, rainfall patterns, we have drought and then intense rainfall, water management, proper water management becomes key. So this means storage and irrigation facilities for drought periods, but then water reservoirs and drainage systems when we have intense rainfall, so that soil has less pressure and nutrients can be properly absorbed. This also means having appropriate windbreaks around farms, as well as overhead shade, which we'll talk about in a bit, because this allows to create microclimate that allows trees to resist higher temperatures. And more generally, also pruning is regularly pruning cocoa trees is also still a good practice. It allows them to be healthy, so being better equipped to resist all types of stressors. And one of the farming practices, and that is most studied currently, I think, and probably one of the most recommended is agroforestry as a climate adaptation strategy, which means that cocoa trees are planted, or in any case coexist with a wide range of other types of non-cocoa trees and crops. This combination depends again on the geographical context as well as the natural landscape in which trees are growing. And it cannot, like, trees need to be selected because there's a risk that, there might be competition for water between trees. This is something you would like to avoid if your focus is to have healthy cocoa trees. Um, but in general, you can have, for example, timber species of trees, which provides shade, which is there has been studies on this as well, and they have been found to be very beneficial to weather the storms of climate change, because as you can imagine, they protect from excessive sunlight. They also allow trees to resist higher temperatures. They retain humidity. They also retain water and nutrients and contribute to better soil quality. And also, they actually provide good habitats for both pest predators and allow, therefore, the spread of diseases, especially if they are vector induced. But also, they also help create a good environment for pollinators to thrive. And so increased biodiversity, which also means, soil and cocoa can regenerate quite naturally within the ecosystem. And this farming practice indeed has been is definitely helpful for climate change adaptation, supports cocoa trees' health as well as yield. And there's some research that shows that in contexts where agricultural inputs are not especially used, this is particularly helpful.
Thank you. And maybe to follow up on that, could you tell us beyond adaptation how cocoa production tackles climate mitigation?
Yes, as Irene said, this is she hinted that this is an integral part of farm management and, of course, of agriculture. It is no secret that agriculture is the only sector that does both at the same time. You just cannot divide adaptation from mitigation and mitigation from adaptation. But for the sake of better delimiting concepts and also for regulatory purposes, this tends sometimes to be divided. For example, regarding agroforestry, we know that integrating, as it was mentioned earlier, integrating trees in cocoa farms allows for higher levels of carbon sequestration, and this is the term, this is the action that we use when we talk about mitigation in biogenic systems such as farming. So it is removal of CO2 from the atmosphere, binding it, making it into biomass, into products with different uses. So this is the usual definition of climate change mitigation within that context. The extent to which agroforestry is employed, its actual contribution to climate change mitigation, it is difficult to be concretely, precisely quantified. This is an emerging area which is the result of quite a few different sciences that interrelate with each other. It is what we hear from a short time now. It's the systems approach, landscape approach. There is a lot of technology also involved in, but it is becoming increasingly central in the activities of various cocoa chain supply chain actors. And the the fund that we manage, the Joint Cocoa Research Fund, has supported such research to try to quantify what is the binding, the CO2 binded in those areas. And of course, in that context, remote sensing is also very important, because we are talking about huge areas. We are talking about also quite precise delineation of those areas for the purpose of actually quantifying and accounting of the carbon removals, because this is also linked with regulations and with other developing initiatives globally, also with the International Panel on Climate Change, Article 6, and also within regional initiatives and carbon farming, carbon removing schemes in EU, in other areas with voluntary carbon market. So there is a confluence of different sciences, different areas of research, in order to be able to have this idea as much as possible clear of how much is being removed, what is the tree coverage in cocoa farms, which is also linked, as Irene said, to a lot of other issues in terms of management of pests and resilience. So the research that it has been funded by the Joint Cocoa Research Fund supported this direction, to see what is the carbon sequestration potential of agroforestry, and it was concentrated in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire's cocoa production. And the results there showed that only 13.2% of cocoa plantations in both countries are currently covered by shade trees. So it is not a big percentage, because also it takes time to develop such systems, which also have to be researched, because it's very important to see what kind of trees they can actually be planted and help cocoa production, soil management, nutrient availability, and of course sun penetration in the canopy. So it was only 13% of 13.2% of cocoa plantations in both countries. But however, carbon sequestration of existing cocoa areas was estimated at a huge, we should say, 117 teragrams. So as a whole, so these are huge numbers. Carbon fluxes are important to keep in mind, but also the other effects are also important to try to quantify, such as biodiversity, again, pests, etc. And this means that there is a lot of potential there to try to see to increase agroforestry and shade tree coverage up to 30%, for example. This was a scenario that was addressed in this research, and it gave the result of additional 89 million tons of CO2 that could be sequestered and removed from the atmosphere, which is also another issue, this additionality that we say, that we have to provide extra action in order for this effort to be recognized legally, also as it goes now. So carbon sequestration again is central to mitigation, and by extension to adaptation also It helps having healthier soils, soil fertility and structure. It is very important. It can have a benefit of having less erosion and closing also nutrient cycles through organic residues. These are all dependent in local pedoclimatic conditions. And of course, it requires also a change of mindset to think in circular terms in cocoa production, which ultimately helps balance further emission CO2 in the atmosphere. Uh, and it has also potential downstream effects in the use of fertilizers. So soil management is a key issue. It has to do with also with water penetration, as it has been hinted by Irene previously. It is, and in this sense, biomass produced, it is important to keep in mind that within this circular mindset, cocoa shells, for example, the residues from the production of intermediate cocoa products can be used for different regions, for different scopes as sustainable biomass, including energy recovery. And this is also a thing to understand, because also in those areas that this cocoa is being produced, energy requirements are also an important factor for the factories to keep running and keep processing cocoa. And this brings us to the parallel discussion on the legal framework, because as I said earlier, legal frameworks exist. In Europe, we have a regulated market previously for non-biogenic emissions, the emissions trading scheme. However, following the global trend, Europe is also now moving forward with legislation that tries to give a direction and also set the ambition for carbon management in biogenic systems. And so within the general EU framework for 2050, net zero greenhouse gas emissions in Europe, economy-wide, all sectors have to contribute, including agriculture and forestry. And this is has been addressed, has been pinpointed for quite a long time now with the land use change and forestry regulation, the LULUCF regulation, which governs how land use emissions and carbon removals are tracked in order to have a balance between removals, which means harvesting forests, for example, also for healthy forest health regions, also for adaptation, for to address dangers of fires. And within the same context, there is also the agriculture, because there also you may have trees and agroforestry implemented, which needs to be quantified, managed, all that to make sure that the removals from those practices and from those stresses like climate change, fires, etc., loss of carbon from soils, the removals have to be at least equal and more than the emissions in those systems. So this is what is being tackled with the LULUCF, and it has a horizon up to 2050. We see how those carbon stocks evolve. We see the impact of climate change in those carbon stocks, and practices are being also developed to address soil management. And here it is where the second, another piece of legislation important in this context takes more shape and a more concrete role. The carbon removals and carbon farming regulation, CRCF, which is a recent piece of legislation, we can say, in the last 2 years that was completed the EU decision-making process, but it is a very important piece of legislation because it goes directly in the methodologies realms, different methodologies from different certification bodies. As I said, these discussions comes also from quite some time with a different golden standard. There are other body certification bodies that have developed their own methodologies, and the European Union comes and says and puts the quality principles that have to be satisfied in order for those methodologies to be recognized at EU level. So it is a quality assurance, we can say, and also the very much needed effort to harmonize those methodologies and those efforts so that we can talk to each other. Because if we say that a project for carbon removals is being developed in Cote d'Ivoire or Ghana, these results should be recognized in different legal jurisdictions, different regions in Europe, in the US, and between different systems like the voluntary carbon market system. And only then we can have also some kind of appreciation, common appreciation, like quantification and remuneration, right? Because these are efforts that are not simple. They cost a lot. They take a lot of time. There's a time horizon issue. They are within the biogenic sphere, so it's not like a machine way that binds a CO2 and that is it, or there are risks to be addressed, and all those things have to have a value, including remuneration for the farmers and for those that engage in those efforts. So this is the main two instruments that the European Union has put in place. But we have to be cautious there because there's a whole ecosystem of legislation where the EU has its biogenic emissions targeted. So it's also agriculture, livestock, which makes part of the whole picture, in addition to the other CO2 legislation, which deals with industrial sectors such as transport, energy, etc. So this is the main framework of the European Union regarding climate change mitigation within the land use managers, land use sectors, we could say.
Thank you very much. Do you have any comments on future outlook for us?
Well, as I said, this is a developing methodology, developing ecosystem, developing mindset, and developing market in the end. So, however, things move also fast, and there are lots of ideas coming in to try to increase the value, the quality of those actions, biodiversity concerns. So this is a very, I would say, it's a very dynamic legislative environment, but also practical implementation and change of paradigm. And we are happy to be there and to witness those changes and hope to make the best out of it for the climate, for farmers, and also for the cocoa industry.
Thank you very much, Irene and Evangelos. That was a very interesting and insightful presentation. Thank you for being with us today and for sharing your insights. We greatly enjoyed this, and we very much look forward to hearing from the European Cocoa Association in the future. Thank you.